Thank you, everybody. Welcome to the second week of the Tufshin Ayin Zayin 5777 Summer Dine Learn. This year we're doing Vayikra, a crash course, which means last week was the introduction, and now every week going forward, in Mitzvah Hashem, we'll be doing a large chunk of Vayikra. This week we're going to be doing in Mitzvah Hashem the first 7 prakim, which is basically the big chunk of korbanos that seems to define all of Vayikra. And we have handouts here. On this side, the gray, we have the outline of all of the Sefer Vayikra. And in the bluish, we have the outline of the first 7 prakim. This outline of the first 7 prakim is going to help you follow along. If you had a chumash, you could even follow along better. But honestly, we're not going to be, because we are limited to half an hour to cover 7 prakim, we're not going to be doing it in as depth as could be done. So this is the main section of Korbanos of Vayikra, which means it's the main section of Korbanos, not the only one, but the main section of all of Chumash, because as we know, Vayikra is the main part of Korbanos. Now, if you look on the outline, you see Vayikra and you see Tzav. Just look at the first one, the second one, Vayikra, the Ola, Ola, Ola. So it talks about, the first parak is about the Korban Ola, which means Hashem will talk about. If you go down to Tzav, you see the first one is Ola. And then Parak Beis is about Mincha. And the second one in Tzav is Mincha. So what you'll see is that it's actually a complete repetition. So the question is why? Why bother repeating it all? What is going on? Now, taking a step back, it's actually not strange to have this repetition because Karbanos are very complicated. A lot of details. From these halachos, Bnei Yisrael had to be able to do the avoda in the Mishkan immediately and going forward. So it's complicated. If you throw all the laws out immediately, it could be overwhelming. So a better way of doing it is to give it from one perspective, to give it from another perspective, and to combine, you'll have everything. Interestingly about Sefer Vayikra, so how many chumashim are there in the Torah? There are 5 svarim, right? So 613 mitzvos, you'd assume, divided relatively evenly. Okay, so take out bracious. That's cheating. There are only a few bracious. So it should be divided equally by about 4. Sefer Vayikra has 247 by one count, 247 mitzvos, which is more than a third. So there are a lot of mitzvos in Vayikra. And also, the Netziv points out in his introduction to Vayikra, there are more drushos, more chazal learning from the psukim in Vayikra than anywhere else. Because it is so complicated, and it's not practical for us now, but back in the time of the Chazal, this was very practical. This is what they did in the Beis HaMikdash on a daily basis. Interestingly, if you lived outside of Yerushalayim, so I have family, relatives in Eretz Yisrael. My sister lives near Bnei Brak. So to her, the kotel, right, is not so practical. It's pretty abstract. She goes, well, once a year, once every 6 months, who knows? If you're in Yerushalayim in the times of the Beis HaMikdash, so Karbanos were practical. Every day you'd see people going with cows down the street up to the Har HaBayis. But if you lived in Tel Aviv or wherever, so it wasn't so practical. It's kind of like us today. So we're like the Tel Aviv people in the times of the Beis HaMikdash. But if you lived in Yerushalayim, this was done day in and day out. So you understand why there's so much detail. But still, why the repetition? So let's look at the order. Let's look at the order that we have. So in Vayikra, Parshas Vayikra, it goes Ola, and we'll talk about each one. Ola, Mincha, Shlamim, Chatas, and Asham. Now, if we go to Parshas Tzav, the first half is Ola, Mincha. So far, so good. So the Shlamim, it goes to Chatas, then it goes to Asham, then it goes to Shlamim. So why does it change the order? That's the question I'd like to focus on. Why is there a change in order in the repetition? You can understand repetition fine. The complicated stuff, maybe you need to say it twice with different halachas each time. But why does it change the order? That's what I'd like to focus on. Okay, so let's take a step back. We discussed last week why the karbanos are from cows, sheep, and goats. Aside from the mincha, which is from the wheat flour, and the birds that come into play. So why specifically cows, sheep, and goats? And we mentioned the Rambam's view that it's because the Egyptians worshipped the cows. The Egyptians worshipped the sheep, the Indians worshipped the cows, and the Babylonians worshipped the Seirim, which are like goats. And therefore, to take us so far away to the other side, we take their gods and we bring them to Hashem. And we said the Ramban didn't like that because he thought korbanos had much more depth to it. And we also said, well, that's not actually what the Rambam meant. That wasn't his full theory of korbanos. As the Ritva pointed out, the Ramban read the wrong parak in Moreh Nevuchim about korbanos. And the Rambam has a much bigger theory. So perhaps the Ramban would say that is a good enough explanation of just the detail of why cows, sheep, and goats. And I'd like to deepen that a little bit. The mincha, as we'll see, the mincha, so there are 4 kinds of mincha, if you have on our outline here. Let's just skip ahead and go there. And Perek Beis, and 2. So you have mincha from wheat meal, which is soles. It's basically grain, refined grain. Then there's a baked mincha, which is a matzah, a fried mincha, and a deep fried mincha. Now, all of this is a fried or baked or anything. They would take their cake or their matzah and they would crumple it up. They'd mix it with oil and then they'd put it on the mizbeach. That was the korban mincha. The halacha is a mincha cannot be chametz. It has to be a matzah. Even if it's fried or deep fried, it's not allowed to leaven. So why not? So the Ramban has 3 possible explanations. One is that chametz is not respectful. So to bring to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you have to bring a respectful korban. So yeah.
What about challah?
Right. So it seems very subjective, right? We happen to like chametz better. We think it's more respectful. Right? Like challah, a big balabasa, big balabasa challah that's big and huge. That's what you have at a Purim Suda, at a Sheva Brachos, and every meal on Shabbos. So you say it's the opposite. So the Ramban seems to think that it was more respectful to bring matzah. I'm not sure why. It seems very subjective to determine what's more kovedik and what's not, what's less. So I don't know. The Ramban also says maybe we just don't know. It's a sod. It's a secret that particular halacha we don't know. Another possible explanation is he quotes the Rambam approvingly, who says the pagans in ancient times used to bring chametz to their idols. So we go the other direction and we bring matzah rather than chametz to go the other direction from the avodah zarah. And the Ramban says that's also a viable explanation. So it seems like the Ramban is not so against the idea that what the avodah zarah did, we do the opposite. He just thinks that korbanos in general have much more depth than that just simple historical explanation. But some of the details could be okay. So it could be the Ramban would agree that why sheep, cows, and goats? Because of the pagans in the ancient times. Could be. There are other explanations. One, which is also the Abarbanel suggested, I don't think it was the first, is that cows, sheep, and goats are the best of the domesticated animals. And we only bring the best to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Sounds good. I don't know. I'm not a farmer. I have no idea. I'm a horse. That sounds good. But maybe they're the best of the kosher animals. I don't know. Maybe.
I thought, wasn't it because that they were the most passive? The concept you are what you eat. If they're not as aggressive, and therefore they're submissive in nature, whereas horses rebel a bit. The cows and the sheep are more submissive, more passive. So therefore, the whole idea of submissive and passive as your
So the cows and the sheep and the goats are more submissive
right.
than the horses. So I could hear that to a behemoth versus a chaya. Like a domesticated animal is
right.
more passive, submissive than a wild animal.
Right, but I'm just saying, even within the domesticated animals.
So within the domesticated animals, these are the most domestic. Again, I have no idea. I don't know.
But there's a Ramban that discusses that. The whole idea is why do we eat kosher? Because we don't eat predatory animals. We don't eat predatory fish. These are all animals that aren't predatory. They're passive in their nature.
Right, but there are no. I hear what you're saying. Are these the best? Are these the most domesticated of the kosher animals? I have no idea. I just don't know. But there are other suggestions. That happens to be a good one.
And to be honest, it's not. I mean, the reason we cook the animals that we are permitted to eat would not have. I don't think that would be a connection to the korban.
Oh, so the korban has to
doing it for a chef.
Right. So the korban has to be kosher from a kosher animal, but the reason for kosher animals could be different than the reasons for a korban. I could hear that also. So there are other explanations. So here, let's get a little more esoteric, more symbolic. So the Abarbanel, and the Refersh also goes in this direction as well, like to see the symbolism in the korbanos. So the Abarbanel, this is the first one I find a little hard, but I'll try to explain it. So the cow represents Avram, because the cow is the biggest of the domesticated animals, and Avram was the biggest of the avos, of the biggest of the patriarchs. Okay? Ve'el habakar ratz Avram, right? So Avram ran to the cow to bring it for the guests. So the cow represents Avram. The sheep represent Yitzhak because of Akedas Yitzhak. Instead of Yitzhak being slaughtered on the Mizbeach, the ayil was, which is a sheep, a male sheep, a ram. And the goats represent Yaakov. Why? Because when Yaakov tried to trick Yitzhak out of the brachos, he brought him goats and he put on his arms the skin of goats. So I don't know. I'm not feeling the love for this shot, but I could hear it. It's a little bit of a stretch, maybe. But the Barbanel brings something which I think speaks to me, and I think it's kind of what Harry was saying in a different way, coming at it from a totally different perspective. The Nevi'im, when they compare Klal Yisrael to animals, they use the cow, the sheep, and the goat. They refer to Sed Pezura Yisrael. Yisrael is a sheep that's lost, or Katzon Latevach Yuval, that's a sheep brought to slaughter. And you see the Nevi'im, they stick to a cow, a sheep, and a goat. So somehow these animals represent Klal Yisrael. And that's also why we bring in the korbanos, whatever the attribute of these animals is that makes them so representative, those are the same attributes of why we bring them as korbanos. And the Ralbag has something very simple. He says, remember, these korbanos had to be brought every day. They're Tamid Shel Shachar, Tamid Shel Ben Arbaim. There's a korban brought in the morning, in the afternoon, and many other korbanos that were brought. Klal Yisrael had to have a lot of them. So the animals that they had available were cows, sheep, and goats. So Hashem said, I want you to be able to bring the korbanos. So he made it possible for Klal Yisrael to bring all these korbanos by requiring them or by enabling them to bring the animals that they had available. That seems to me a very practical reason. It's not very inspiring, but it's practical. And sometimes when it comes to halacha and religion, you got to be practical. You got to have the Torah was not given to malachim; it has to be doable. So the Ramban says, let's wait for that. Okay. So that's step one. And I just want to emphasize the Ralbag that these korbanos had to be brought immediately. And that's why we have the repetition like we discussed before, because these were very relevant halachos that they had to focus on. So why the different order? That's why we have the repetition, but why the different order? So let's go through each type of korban, and maybe we can understand what they represent at least. Of course, we can't go through all the halachos. Some of these korbanos have a whole masechta to themselves, menachos. We're not going to go through all menachos in the next 15 minutes. So ola. So the ola korban, the korban ola, you bring an animal, and there are different kinds of ola. You can bring from a cow, from the cattle. If you can't afford that, you can bring from a sheep or from a goat. And if you can't afford that, you bring from the birds. And as you bring it, so you're the owner, you bring it to the mizbeach. You do smicha on it. You yourself put your hands on it, and you push down. And then the shechita, someone has to shecht it. You can shecht it if you're good enough, right? I don't know if you have to bring your certificate showing that you're certified to shecht, because we don't want anyone doing shechting a puzzle in the Mishkan or the Beis Hamikdash. But anyone can shecht, and then the blood. They keep a little container to capture the blood, and that's when the Kohanim started doing it. Kohanim captured the blood, they brought it to the Mizbeach, they did what they need to do, then they skin the animals and they chop it up, and they go through all that avoda, and then with an ola, they toss it all on the Mizbeach. All goes on the Mizbeach, it gets burnt there, and the smoke goes up to Shemayim. Goes up, and to some people that's why it's called ola. Ola means to go up, so the smoke goes up. That's one of the explanations of why it's called an ola. So as we said last week, according to the Ramban, the korban represents that we should be brought as a korban. But we're not. Instead, we're bringing an animal itself, because otherwise we wouldn't have any Klal Yisrael, wouldn't have any people left. So we bring the animals to remind us, as a musar, that we have done things wrong. So what sin do you bring an ola for? So one opinion is that it's for bad thoughts, thinking of averas. But I think the dominant opinion is that for mitzvah saseh. If you fail to do a mitzvah saseh, you bring a korban ola. And a mitzvah saseh is an opportunity to get closer to Hashem. So by lacking this lack of reaching out to Hashem, you bring the ola, that korban, and that korban brings you back. It repairs you. It brings you back. It brings your relationship back into balance. So David Tzvi Hoffman takes this Ramban and he takes it one step further. And he says, what is an ola? An ola represents that we ourselves belong to a Kodesh Baruch Hu. Like as we said, it's as if we're bringing ourselves as a korban. So the ola is as if we belong to a Kodesh Baruch Hu. B'chol nafshecha. So now we go on to the mincha. As we said, with the mincha, either you take the flour, the meal, and you mix it with oil, and you throw that onto the mizbeach. Not you, the Kohen puts that on the mizbeach, and it's gone. Or with the matzah, also mix it with oil, goes up on the mizbeach, it's gone, and deep fried, etc. All of those. And the last kind of omer that we have on our list is the mincha, is the omer, the shtei alechem, that we would bring on Shavuos. So a mincha is a kind of ola. That seems to be the case, because it goes on the mizbeach and it's gone. It's all to Hashem. So Rabbi David Tzvi Hoffman says again, so what's wheat? Wheat, bread, it represents our money, our valuables. So the ola represents that we, ourselves, our bodies, our neshamas belong to a Kodesh Baruch Hu. And the mincha represents that everything that we own, our possessions, belong to a Kodesh Baruch Hu. And those are the messages of the ola and the mincha. And an ola and a mincha is not only a requirement at certain times, it's also something you bring voluntarily. In Nadarim and Nadavos, if you want to bring a korban to the Beis HaMikdash, you could choose what kind of korban you bring. You could bring an ola, you could bring a mincha, or you could bring the next one, which is a shlamim. Shlamim is where the Dine Learn. So from our perspective, shlamim is the best kind. Because shlamim, part of it goes on the mizbeach, part of it the Kohen himself eats, and part of it we eat. So shlamim is the korban that we get to eat. So why is it called shlamim? So the Gemara, the Chazal say, because it brings shalom between us, between everybody. It's not just that when you're negotiating, right? You always want to get to a place where it's a win-win situation, right? Where nobody loses. So here it's a win-win-win. The Mizbeach wins, the Kohen wins, and we win. So that brings shalom to Klal Yisrael, and shalom to us and a Kodesh Baruch Hu, and to the Kohen. We all reach a state of peace. The Rashbam says it a little differently. Rashbam says, why is it called shlamim? It's l'shalim, to pay back. You're bringing a neder and a dava to pay back Hashem for whatever good He brought to you, you're bringing back. So there's a korban toda, right? Why do you bring a korban toda? To thank Hashem. So toda is a shlamim. And so that fits into the Rashbam's idea of paying Hashem back. For the good, you bring shlamim to pay Hashem back. Okay, moving on. So far we did ola, mincha, and shlamim, all of which you can bring voluntarily. Then we get to chatas. Chatas you bring for mainly if you do shogeg on something that is an Isser Kares. If chas v'sholom you do a terrible avera, but it was an accident, it's a shogeg, so you don't get kares, you don't get any punishment from a bezdin, but you bring this korban chatas. And this is perhaps the most fascinating part of the Parshas Vayikra, because it talks about the different kinds of chatas who could do an avera. It's not just us as individuals. So if you look on the outline we have, so okay, introduction to chatas, good. Then a chatas for the Kohen HaMashiach, if he does, not Mashiach, but the Kohen, if the Kohen Gadol makes a mistake, so he has to bring a chatas. If the Sanhedrin make a mistake, they bring a chatas. And if the Nasi, the king, or the Nasi, he brings a chatas, and then it gets to us, the commoners, the usual balabatim. If we do an avera, then we bring a chatas as well. So in other words, chatas is a kapara, and it's an obligation. It's not something we can bring voluntarily. Okay, we're making progress. We have 10 minutes left. We already went through 4 of the 5 korbanos we wanted to go through. Good job. So now we get to Asham. Now the first that I have in Asham is not really an Asham. It's a machlokes, whether it's an Asham or a chatas, but whatever. It's a korban olav v'yored. It's a famous one because it depends on how much you can afford. The more you can afford, the bigger the korban, the fancy korban you have to bring. If you're poor, instead of bringing a sheep or a goat, you bring birds. And if even you can't afford that, then you bring just a mincha, some wheat meal. Then there's an asham for me'ilah and asham talui. Asham talui. So what does it mean in asham talui? Asham talui is if you did an avera, so it's machlokas. You did an avera, you don't know which avera, or you don't even know, you're not even sure if you did an avera. So if you know for sure, and it was in a sikaris, and it was a shogeg, then you bring a chatas. But if you don't know, you bring an asham. So Ramban here says something fantastic, mind-blowing. It's brought la halacha in Hilchos Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah, by the Ramah. So Ramban says, which is a worse name? So chatas is an avera, and asham is an avera. So why don't they have the same name? So he says, an asham is a harsher name. Asham is like to destroy. It's like we're destroyed. We did such a bad an avera. So why is an asham worse than a chatas? Says the Ramban, if you don't know you did an avera, how are you supposed to do tshuva for it? A chatas, you know what avera you did, and you know you did an avera, for sure. So you do tshuva. But look, psychologically, maybe I did it, maybe I didn't do it. So am I really going to put my heart into tshuva? Not so much. So therefore, you have to bring an even worse, a harsher korban, because psychologically it's more difficult to get close to Hashem. And the Ramah says this, and when he's talking about tshuva, during the Aseret Yemei tshuva, so he says you have to do tshuva for the averos you did know, and you also have to do tshuva for the averos you're not sure if you did, and that, he says, is even harder. And he says, I think the Ramban says it also, how do we know that? Because the shlamim, if you can afford it, the asham, if you can afford it, is even more expensive than a chatas. If you can't afford it, so there are different sales you can do, different levels. But if you can afford it, an asham is even more expensive than a chatas because it's harsher. Okay.
Because you should have known? What was it harsher?
It's because well in general. So why do we bring a chatas in general? It was a shogeg. It was an accident, right? It's because you should have been careful. You should have known not to. You should have made sure you don't do an avera. That's also to some extent why we have derabanans, because we have to guard ourselves and make sure we don't do averas. I think as the Rav likes to say that it's not just that we have guards, siyagim guards at Chazal. We should all put up on our own guards where we think we might slip, and it's hard for us. And the same thing for a chatas. If we sin by accident, it's not really our fault. But in asham, you don't even know it. So you can't even do tshuva, or it's hard to do tshuva, because psychologically, maybe I did, maybe I didn't. So I'm not going to go full force, put my full heart into the tshuva. Whereas the chatas, you know for sure. So you can do tshuva wholeheartedly. So let's talk about the 2 different sections. We didn't really do tzav. It's mainly the same stuff, but it's very different. So, you don't have a chumash in front of you. So I'll read to you from the chumash, and we'll see what the difference is. So the beginning of Vayikra is Vayikra el Moshe Vayidaber Adonai Elav Me'ol Moed Lemor. Just the introduction. Daber el Bnei Yisrael v'Amarta Aleihem Adam ki yakriv mikem karban la'Adonai min ha'behema min ha'bakar min ha'tzon takrivis karbanchem. Again, introduction. So it's Hashem telling Moshe to tell Klal Yisrael, whenever anyone has to bring a korban, whenever any of you have to bring a korban, you bring either cow, right, either cattle, sheep, or goat. So who's he talking to? Klal Yisrael. Now, if we look at the beginning of Parshat Tzav, Vaydaber Adonai Moshe Lemor, Tzav is Aharon v'ezbanov Lemor, Zos Teratz Hola, Hi Hola al Mokdal Mizbeach Kol Halayla Ad Haboker, Ve'esh HaMizbeach Tukadbo. So who are they talking to? The Kohanim. So Vayikra is a manual for us, Klal Yisrael, how we bring a korban. And it's telling us what to expect when we get to the Mishkan, or the Beis HaMikdash. Here's what we do. Here's what the Kohanim do. We do it up to this point. We could shecht if we want. We bring it. We shecht. We do the smicha. We could shecht. After that, here's what the Kohen is going to do. And then here's what's going to happen to the korban. Ola, say goodbye. Mincha, say goodbye. Shlomim, say, Gival, that's great. And then, etc. In Vayikra, it's totally different. The perspective is from the Kohanim. It's, here's how you do it as a Kohen. This is what you need to do. And it immediately starts talking about what they wear, how they clean it up, Truma Sedeshin, how they clean it up. It doesn't tell Klal Yisrael how to clean up the Beis HaMikdash. Not my job, right? Kohanim, good, you do that. And how you change the clothes. It's not our job to make sure that there's always a fire on the Mizbeach. It's Kohanim. And that's what Parshat Tzav is all about. It's for the Kohanim. It's a totally different perspective. Okay. So why is the order switched? So the Ramban suggests as follows. He says the first. So if you look at the sheet, we have Ola, Mincha, Shlamim, Chatas, and Asham. So for Klal Yisrael, from our perspective, we care about when we bring it and why we bring it. So Ola, Mincha, and Shlamim, we bring as Nedarim and Nedavos. We choose to bring it. They have to be grouped together because those are the korbanos that we choose to bring. Chatas and Asham are Chiyuvim. Those are korbanos that we have to bring. So they're grouped together. So from the perspective of Klal Yisrael, to bring the korbanos, it's a sensible, it's an understandable grouping. While Tzav is from the perspective of the Kohanim. And Ola, Mincha, and Chatas, those are Kodshei Kodshim. And then Shlamim, those are Kodshim Kala. And because the Kohanim, when they do the Avoda, they treat each one differently. Therefore, and Tzav is from the perspective of the Kohanim. What do they need to do? It's a manual for Kohanim. Therefore, the order is specific for Kohanim. Here's what you need to do, and this is the order to do it. So from my perspective, when I'm Mavir Sedra, when I go through the Chumash, so years ago, before I knew this Ramban, it's just the same thing over and over again. I'm back at the Ola again. It's like, have you ever driven through Riverdale? So this happened to me. The first time I drove through Riverdale, I don't remember the name of the road, but there's this one road. I drove past it, and I was a little lost because I always get lost wherever I go. This is before GPS. And then I passed the road again. And then I passed the same street a third time, and I say, forget it, I'm lost. And then the next block is exactly where I was going to go, because it has the same street 3 times, and I thought I was lost. And same thing with Queens, right? 74th Street, 74th Road, 74th Avenue. So years ago, before I knew this Ramban, the Ola again, I figured we were lost. There's no way I'm ever going to understand all this Korbanos stuff. It's the same thing over again. So this Ramban is a key for being able to distinguish between part by part. And one of the reasons I'm doing these outlines is because once you're able to distinguish it to a smaller section, it's much easier to digest and to understand as you go through the Parsha. Okay, now I know where I am. Now I know where I am. When I was a kid, we only had like 3 minutes. So Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur davening, when you're a kid, it seems like 48 hours long, right? It never ends. But as you get older, you realize, well, there are different parts. Psukei de Zimra. Then there's the Kriya Shema Brachos. Then there's the Amida, right? And then there's the Chazaras Shatz, and then there's the shofar blowing, the Kriya Torah, whatever. The different pieces. Once you understand, it's actually easier to get through and easier to understand that there are different, when you break it down into different pieces. So that's just the general philosophy. What I'm trying to do here is break it down into different pieces. So for me, it's easier to get through it and understand what's going on. So now, Vayikra and Tzav, we've mastered. The Vayikra in the first half of Tzav, and Amir Hashem next week we'll continue with the second half of Tzav. Sorry, one more thing. Shkayach to the Pessin family for sponsoring tonight's hamburgers and hot dogs. A great way to go into the fast. Shkayach, thank you very much. You should see a lot of asacha from everything.